Okay, I see that the Hangout is now live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another in a series of our Google Hangouts on Next Billion. My name is Scott Anderson, and I'm the managing editor here at Next Billion. To visit our archive of interviews with thought leaders as well as live Google Hangouts, please head on over to our YouTube channel and just search for Next Billion on YouTube. Today I'm joined by Stu Hart and Fernando Casado. They are contributors to and editors of a new book called Base of the Pyramid 3.0. Hangout is now live. And this is how you know it's live because I'm getting some feedback on my other screen. So let me just shut that down. They're the editors and contributors to a new book called Base of the Pyramid 3.0, Sustainable Development Through Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And you are probably, if you pay any attention whatsoever to the base of the pyramid or social enterprise space, you've probably encountered their work. But I will give you a real quick background on our guest today. Stu Hart is joining us from Burlington, Vermont. He is the Stephen Grossman Endowed Chair at the Sustainable Business at the University of Vermont's Business School, and is the co-director of the school's Sustainable Entrepreneurship MBA program. He's also the S.C. Johnson Chair Emeritus in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University's Johnson Graduate School of Management. And of course, he's also well known for his initial article, Fortune at the Base of the Pyramid with C.K. Prahalad. Also joined today from Korea, so thank you for joining us so early in the morning or late in the evening there, is Fernando Casado. He's a PhD economist and journalist, and he's focused on economic and sustainable development. He's also the Associate Director of Enterprise for Sustainable World VOP Network. Fernando specializes in projects related to economic and sustainable development, and he's worked as a strategic advisor and consultant in a whole bunch of organizations that our audience is probably familiar with, including UNDP, UNIDO, IADB, and the World Bank. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here today. We really appreciate your time and enjoyed the book. I guess just to start off, I guess we'll begin with you, Stu. Why write this book now? Why write and compile it? What's happening today in the field of Base of the Pyramid that compelled you both to put this together now?
Yeah, well, you know, as you know, we've been, Fernando and I and other colleagues have been over the past 5 years developing this thing called the VOP Global Network, and it's really begun to gather some momentum. So as that took shape, as that took hold, as a number of the innovation centers and labs began to produce their own thinking, and have been for some time, it occurred to Fernando and I that we had the critical mass of an important contribution here. So the book really is a pulling together of pieces from across the VOP Global Network, and it seemed as though it was kind of falling into a pattern that suggested we had something to say. That was our initial motivation. We also have another major summit coming up for the VOP Global Network, which occurs in July, here in Burlington. So all these things seem to come together at the same time.
Fernando, how about your perspective on why the time was right for this?
Yes, I would agree with Stuart, and basically when creating the network and seeing it grow, it was very interesting to see how all the different labs from the network were generating knowledge, and we were all created in a very resilient way. And it was kind of interesting to appreciate how that knowledge generation was responding in a way to the same challenges, but we were responding to them in a different way. So looking at the network, we were a group of practitioners, of researchers, of analysts concerned with the same challenges and with very different regional backgrounds, and addressing them at a different stage, specialized in different stages of the value chain. So it's when we decided that so much knowledge gathered together had to be in a way communicated and shared with the community. And it's when Stu and I started to think about the added value of this book, to communicate and transfer the knowledge generated with the rest of the community and see how can these innovations transmit an impact to improve the VOP communities.
So obviously we know about VOP 1.0, but you also are talking about, you have been talking about, Stu, for a while, VOP 2.0, and then of course the book is introducing VOP 3.0. So could you walk us through each one and really what differentiates one version from the other?
Yeah, sure. So I think the 3.0, as Fernando was suggesting, it seemed as though as we looked at what the different labs, kind of their current thinking, the work they were doing, when you took it in its totality, it seemed to suggest, kind of the coming together of perhaps another step in the evolution of this whole domain. And if 1.0 was the idea of, selling low-cost products, affordable products, we'll call that sort of the sachet revolution, if you will. If that was VOP 1.0, right, kind of getting extended distribution for lower cost products to currently underserved populations, and if that met with more limited success, or the idea around 2.0 was the importance of co-creation, right, rather than just taking current products and putting them in affordable packages and getting extended distribution and maybe partnering up with an NGO. If 2.0 was really more about co-creating new products and new business models, which I think it was, right? I think that was a really, really important step in the journey, and it remains so. So we saw, some of the early examples of that being something like Cemex's Patrimonio Hoy initiative, or the Chodokul in India, which drew more heavily on the idea of engagement, in partnership with local communities, both in terms of the artifact, the design and development of the artifact, if there is one, or the business model. That if that was 2.0, the idea of creating a fortune with the base of the pyramid, as Ted London and I and others have written about. What we saw coming together here, and I guess the reason that we talk about it as 3.0 is that we sort of see another step, beginning to develop and evolve that looks more like, if 2.0 was really more for existing companies, more about carving out an innovation kind of protected space to experiment with a small new business, then 3.0 is really more purpose-driven. That, increasingly we're seeing companies that take this on as a fundamental reason for being, as opposed to just having certainly not a CSR project, but even as sort of a small, side experiment. We think more about 3.0 as companies that have taken this on as part of their core mission and purpose. So if we think of the Tatas in India as an example, or we're doing a bunch of work with PepsiCo these days, and their mantra is performance with purpose, and I think they actually take that seriously. That you sort of see an evolution now toward this being more purpose-driven and less just for let's have a few experiments that will give us positive spin, out there in the world with our CSR report. And if 2.0 was more about co-creating a product or maybe a business model, often with existing technology in a company or proprietary technology, then I think 3.0 takes us more into the space of open innovation, and Fernando will talk more about this. It doesn't all have to come from inside the company. It can be, technology can be drawn from a variety of sources. Grassroots technology, indigenous technology, shelf technology from universities. There are a variety of different places from which technology or innovation can be drawn, and so I think we see that in the evolution of this idea of a 3.0. And I'd say the third main kind of aspect has to do with, rather than, if 2.0 was more about creating standalone ventures, that were embedded, and co-created, 3.0, I think, takes us into the realization that how important it is to create a whole innovation value ecosystem. That it's not just about a product, even if it's an embedded product or a co-created product, but rather a wider kind of value ecosystem, if you will, which solves multiple problems. And so for that reason, less just about looking at impact, poverty impact in terms of affordability or livelihood generation, more geared toward looking at kind of integrated impact from a sustainable development point of view, which could occur on multiple dimensions. So I know one of the ventures we'll talk about, and we have talked about in the book, is CleanStar, right? And we can get into that a little bit more because I think it illustrates a number of the aspects that I'm talking about here. But Fernando, I think those are some of the broad strokes in terms of 3.0 versus 1.0 or 2.0.
Yeah, totally, totally. I would agree completely, and I think as Stuart was saying, one of the main points is this concept of the vision and the values, as we are addressing on the book. And I think values have changed in a way that companies are defining their vision. If before it was important or relevant to adopt social implications and generate value with communities, now I think it's becoming crucial in terms of the challenges we're addressing. So I think that the vision and the values driven are becoming essential for business development and business innovation, but also the platform. And I think that what we've seen is that the ecosystems on which business operate today are becoming, are changing a lot, the way they communicate and the way they generate value also. And we're seeing in very recent years, like in the last 5 to 10 years, amazing changes in terms of the open economy and the share economy and horizontal platforms that generate value together. So I think that there are a lot of resources out there to transform the way we think, create, and communicate among each other. And I think it was essential to incorporate it with the VOP dimension, because the way we consume, the way our habits are changing very fast, and I think the way we're thinking in order to solve VOP challenges have to adapt to these changes. No? So I think that was one of the key drivers also in moving to the 3.0 to engage all this knowledge generated on all this ecosystem platform and incorporate in the business model.
I mean, however it's happening, it seems to be happening, or whatever is causing it to happen for businesses to make these the types of value changes that you're talking about. It's definitely feels more the norm than it was even 5 years ago. And there are lots of great examples in the book of things that appear to be going down that route and then change dramatically. And you mentioned it earlier, Stu, and I wanted to get into the example of CleanStar Ventures. So for those not familiar, CleanStar was a clean cookstove concern in Mozambique, but it was really trying to be a multi-product, multi-service company. So it was sort of trying to develop an agroforestry model, which you write, Stu, at its peak, I guess. So was reaching 1,000 farmers, and it was selling about 2 million liters a year of ethanol-based cooking fuel, trying to phase out, trying to give people a reason to move their fuel for their stoves away from charcoal. Raised a lot of capital from big development banks and corporate partners. I think you quoted as 21 million, but in 2013 it seemed to liquidate more or less. I guess if you could give me a little more background, Stu, or elaborate on that and what went wrong with CleanStar.
Yeah, I think CleanStar to me is a really interesting case because it exemplifies a lot of, I think, what Fernando and I are talking about with this 3.0 idea. It was, from its inception, its purpose was to solve problems, right? The kind of problems we're talking about, to address the clean cooking problem, the deforestation problem, the charcoal problem, but to do so in a way that was more than just selling clean cookstoves, because we've seen how many failed clean cookstove ventures there have been and there are. And so CleanStar from the very beginning thought of this in more ecosystemic terms, where it wasn't just about affordable cookstoves. It was also about working with smallholder farmers in the rural areas to actually kind of move them away from subsistence cassava toward the integrated production of nutritious food crops that allowed them then to produce cassava for biofuel production. So you're producing, kind of locally generated, branded biofuel that's coupled with the cookstove and is part of the branding of the whole concept, sold to people primarily in the city. But the rural part of it, in terms of development, is huge, right? As far as livelihood generation, reduction in deforestation, huge sustainable development impact socially and environmentally, as well as the positive impact associated with the clean cooking solutions. And that all of that began to gather momentum, in this sort of ecosystem value way. What happened was really kind of curious, because from the very beginning, of course, they struggled against the conventional conception of what a venture should look like. That there were terms like this has way too many moving parts. This is way too complicated. This can never work. You can't possibly manage this much complexity. All those kinds of concerns, which are real, by the way. But at the end of the day, they were able to the different kind of moving parts, pieces of the ecosystem were actually reinforcing of each other. So if there was a weakness in part of it, another part would compensate for a while. So, for example, if it took a while to get the farmers going, you could source cassava for a while, right, and still sell, still meet demand in terms of biofuel and the clean cooking solution. So that actually these different parts of the ecosystem made the business model more resilient. And what ultimately happened was, as they began to scale it, right, it began to actually get big. There were visions of taking it pan-Africa, because this problem exists across, it's not just Mozambique, it's through most of sub-Saharan Africa. As that began to scale, they began to attract more conventional financiers who came into the picture. Bank of America came in for carbon credits. Then they got a second round financing. And what happened tragically was, as they grew and attracted more capital, the capital providers ended up taking it back to the original concern of, this is too complex, there are too many moving parts, and at the end of the day, the venture was taken back to its bare bones, which was the sale of clean cookstoves, right? That the whole agroforestry models appeared to be a bridge too far. It was too complicated, so the financiers caused the venture to be refocused on clean cookstoves, and in the end, that sort of took the wind out of the sails. It still exists, right? But I'd say it's perhaps a shadow of what it could have been, in terms of the overall conception and scaling potential.
And we talked about this a little bit in preparation for this, and you mentioned it in the book, is another huge concept by the late C.K. Prahalad was core competency. Don't stray too far from your mission. Build alliances, but don't get over your skis in terms of what you can provide as a business. And what you're saying seems to argue against that, at least for emerging markets, for companies that are working in emerging markets where the infrastructure, the supply chains, and other enabling technologies might not be there. So, what are some lessons learned from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a really good and important question. Because I think there are two answers. One, of course, is that when it comes to new market creation in underserved space, that some of the traditional logic of how you better serve established markets doesn't hold, right? That I've used the metaphor of existing markets when we think about innovation and new product development is more like a rifle shot. You can shoot a product into pre-existing infrastructure, commercial infrastructure that's already there. And that typically doesn't hold as well when it comes to underserved space at the base of the pyramid, where it becomes necessary to actually co-create the infrastructure itself, right? So the challenge is somewhat different when it comes to new market creation than entering existing markets. So I think that's point number one. Point number two is that a Clean Star, as a company, obviously can't do all this themselves. Right? I think it's true that you can't possibly be expert in all of these different aspects of the ecosystem that we've just described, which is one of the reasons why Clean Star was a partnership ecosystem, right? which I think is another important piece of the 3.0 puzzle. That Clean Star was an alliance among several partners, including Novozymes, including ICM, which does the biofuel facilities, including Bank of America, including a variety of NGOs. In other words, it was a consortium of different players that brought different core competencies that were crucial to this overall ecosystem. Clean Star itself, I'd say one of its core competencies was systems integration, right? That actually can be a core competency, and I think in the case of Clean Star, that was one of their really important capabilities, was their ability to be, like a symphony conductor, to orchestrate all of these things and cause them to come together. that was a key part of what they were able to do.
And I guess getting back to and that's a good point, I guess, to get into more detail on partnerships. But before I do, Fernando, turn to you on that question. We did get a live question from someone who's watching right now named Gonzalo G. And he says, "Good morning from Bogota," and he addresses this to you, Fernando. He says that he met you in Spain during the loss of the Chilean event of the Global Compact. I'm not sure exactly. Chilean football event of the Global Compact.
Yes, I will.
So yeah. Go ahead.
We suffered and actually.
Okay. So you know it's legit. So he asked though, how can we include new generations of students to include more knowledge and opportunities in 3.0 through offline technology, reading, working in communities, etc. And he also adds, when will the book be published in Spanish? So.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities to engage students, and we are actually looking forward to a new generation of students, a new generation of practitioners, young that understand much better than we did all these challenges, because I think that every generation has its own problems. And as in a way, we are a little conditioned by the world we grew.
Right.
And I think that the young students that are growing up are growing in a very different world, and I think they will understand better for certain things that in our generation we have more challenges addressing. So I actually have a lot of hope that students get engaged quickly on these issues and that become very intolerant to certain challenges like poverty and like inequality, which in a way people from our generation have become used, and I think it's something natural. And I think that the capacity of these new students to change things are important. How to get engaged? I think it's, back in the universities and doing community development, there are many areas where they can be engaged. Actually, I think an initiative that Stuart is doing in India can be very interesting, engaging students and rural entrepreneurs from rural areas with business entrepreneurs from big companies in classrooms, in presential areas. Maybe Stu, you want to develop a little further the kind of exchanges you're having in India, because I think it's very important for this question.
Right, and I think his question is related. Gonzalo's question is related to new ways in which partnerships can be forged. And when I talk about partnership, I'm talking more participatory, crowdfunding, open source. Those are a few of the areas that you're addressing, I think, in the book, not necessarily in technological means. Fernando, if you could share maybe some of the revelations in the book when it came to innovative partnerships, if you had one or two that you would cite.
Sure. It was quite kind of interesting also to analyze the concept of partnership within this framework of 3.0, because partnership has become such a trending word, and everybody is talking about partnerships. All corporations are having partnerships, and at the end, it seems like partnerships were something that was very easy to do. So if you look through the book, there are like very strong efforts in really partnering with VOP communities and creating a partnership framework to develop 3.0 approach. But what we realized through our research and through our examples working with people is that partnerships are actually very complicated, and we have to create a new way, a new mindset of addressing partnerships, going beyond that kind of contract or subcontract that many partnerships are framed in. Like they're really corporations subcontracting an NGO or a government, a company, an NGO, having like implementing a project together. Going from that model of like more unilateral partnership to creating horizontal platforms of added value and value generation. And like a hybrid government, where the whole governance system of a project, of a company, is shifting. I think that in that sense, even the concept of private sector, public sector, it gets a little diluted in a hybrid structure that addresses social value, environmental value, and economic value at the same time with the same goal. And that's very interesting how this platforms are being created. So just to mention a few examples, in Colombia, we're creating this business facility to develop innovation through partnerships and creating a whole rural, urban approach, bottom up with all the players, and it's not only a private sector approach, but it's also engaging funders, international communities, the unions, and any player that can add value. I think that when you think of partnerships in that like broader aspect and from a horizontal approach in a common shared hybrid governance structure, I think you're getting closer to that type of business models that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's I'm sorry we had a little bit of trouble with your audio, but I think we heard about 80% of what you said. Sorry, I missed that about that 20%. But Stu, would you add to that in terms of partnerships that you also were found interesting in the book and trend lines that might be changing?
Yeah, I think if the earlier thinking about partnerships typically was to the importance of having an NGO partner, right? Often that was the and don't get me wrong, that is important, right? Often to have an NGO partner. But I think one of the important things that comes out of several of the pieces in the book is to think much more systemically about I hate to keep using the term ecosystem, but to think about a partnership ecosystem, right? That there are so many different roles that can be filled out by partners, and CleanStar is a good example of that. That it's not just kind of the venture or the company as a standalone, and then you need an NGO in order to help you get local presence. Rather, you think about putting together the entire business model really is composed of partnership, and that the company or the venture increasingly becomes, again, the metaphor of the conductor, right? That really becomes the primary role. And I think Fernando's several of the pieces in the book make that point and also offer up a framework for thinking about how to construct those kinds of partnership ecosystems.
Yeah, and one of the chapters that kind of resonated with me was the contribution from 3 authors, all from Endeavor in Germany, and they were looking at participatory market research, and they were doing research in Madagascar, Sierra Leone, and Brazil, and they were trying to really get consumers to respond truly to market questions, and of course this is nothing new to anyone who's done field work with people who are poor, is that their answers might not be truthful. They might not want to acknowledge they're poor. That's obviously something that's very, very difficult to do, and so it's hard to really assess what their needs are. And so they handed out cameras to these consumers to take pictures of furniture that they liked in their homes or other people's homes in the community, and literally put smiley faces or frown faces on the objects that they liked and didn't. But it feels like even with feature phones and soon to be the smartphones coming in, it feels like we're really getting there's so many more tools to really understand what consumers are wanting at the VOP, as opposed to a person with a clipboard going up and asking them questions in a cold fashion. Fernando, what do you think of that in terms of the changes that we're seeing there?
Yes, no, I think it's completely right how you frame it. I think that we are actually on the point of the iceberg of this. I would call it like a data revolution. And what our colleagues from Endeavor envisioned is a more direct way to gather data, but actually it's way beyond the actual techniques that we're using. You see how certain cities are analyzing data with like open data approaches, and the sophisticated ways of aggregating so much information of citizens, from different factors. I think that the question the challenge was how to get to the information, and the lack of information was what jeopardized your development. I think today we are on an opposite approach in terms that the challenge is how to sort that information. an era that we could get a problem of becoming intoxicated of an excess of information, and access to information is not kind of a problem. The big challenge is how to aggregate that data, how to analyze that data, how to process it to make right decisions. So I think that forces us to change completely the approach once again, and use technology wisely, not to be intoxicated by the excess of information, and make the right decisions. And there are many approaches that are being used. I think that, again, one of the most relevant factors is that what used to be called the beneficiary, now that we call him like the strategic partner, empowered with this technology, he not only is a source of information, he's a very active and proactive member who can provide you very direct opinion, not only to you but to the whole world immediately. So I think I would say it's a data revolution. And to tell you the truth, I'm very sincere. I'm not sure what you will say, but I think we're still starting to figure out how to use this properly to promote real social transformation around this. But I think there's not one way to use it, and we're still trying to figure out how to use that in the benefit of social transformation in a proper way.
Yeah, Stu, do you have some thoughts on that too?
Yeah, no, I think Fernando's spot on. You know, there's a big difference between data and insight, right? And as we have more sophisticated technology, that increases our ability to collect, gather data, but that may or may not, give us real insight. And at the end of the day, there's no substitute for actual immersion, and dialogue and co-creation. That we don't want to be duped into thinking that just because we have such improved technological capability and increasingly smartphone and online access, that's a substitute for actually building human relationships and engaging in a deeper dialogue to understand how we co-create something that really works, especially from the point of view of those in the community. Because I think the problems that are pointed out in that chapter have to do with that there's a superficiality often when it comes to traditional marketing research that is what I think is one of the primary challenges when it comes to basic pyramid, is how do you get beyond that, and unfortunately there's probably no substitute actually for old-fashioned things like building trust, establishing a relationship, and that's really how you get to something that's going to work.
Mm-hmm. And business models are showcased throughout this book, and one of the last chapter, sadly, is focused on addressing poverty and environmental challenges at home and abroad. But it looks, one of the subsections of the chapter looks at VOP businesses in Japan after the tsunami 4 years ago, and it's pretty sadly apropos given what's going on in Nepal after this earthquake this past week. But there are many emergency types of business and social businesses that really were born out of the experience in Japan after the tsunami. And there are several models listed here, both multinationals and smaller scale operations that are now being implemented in areas that sub-Saharan Africa and other places where there are the lack of infrastructure. I'm just curious about whether there are some lessons that can be carried over from these crisis zones into, I guess, new crisis zones.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that unites all cases of this, and we could go back to the Banda Aceh, in the tsunami, is that you're starting over again, right? I mean, I think fundamentally what you face is the horror of that level of destruction on the one hand, but also the possibility of starting again. And that's where I think the VOP actually has a chance to really shine in that situation, where you have a chance to essentially start from scratch. that in a sense that's what that's what natural disasters and other forms of disasters, as tragic as they are, offer up. And I think the Japan example really points to that. You know, that so much innovation came. You know, I mean, the silver lining, if you could call it that, is that there are a number of innovations that sprung from the necessity of starting again that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, and that have potential applicability around the world. And so I think the same is true. You know, and I still remember, like, when the tsunami hit, you know, in Banda Aceh, that there was similar sort of logic was called for, that maybe this is a chance for entrepreneurs and companies to participate in the rebuilding of, you know, of these human settlements and societies from the ground up. And you know, it offers the chance to really be to engage in the kind of innovation that we all know is necessary. So I guess as I think about it, that's what I think all of these have in common.
I guess one last question to wrap up is, when you think of us getting to the point where we're on to VOP 4.0, 5.0, or maybe 3.0 is considered your pinnacle, but what steps need to be taken, do you believe, on the entrepreneur side to really get to 3.0? I mean, if they can be examples in the book, but Stu, what would you say are really some of the top tier things that people need to be doing or thinking about, changing the way they're thinking to get to the 3.0?
You know, I think a lot of I think of these levels as sort of nested. You know, that there's nothing inherently wrong with 1.0. You know, the idea that we need to have an affordable, you know, pricing has to be right and so forth. And we need extended distribution, that's all good, and that 2.0 made us realize how important co-creation was, and that you would need a kind of protected space in order to engage in, you know, this very different looking business proposition. And, you know, 3.0, I think, takes that a step further. But if I think about all three of them together, I think there are a set of tools, there's a set of knowledge and skills that probably are there from the start, and that business schools traditionally have not really been focused on developing. So, I mean, just as an example, I'm sitting here in Burlington, Vermont, and the reason I'm here is because we're engaged in, you know, the enterprise of creating a completely new MBA program from the ground up called Sustainable Entrepreneurship MBA. And, you know, baked into that from the beginning is the idea that there is content, there is a growing body of knowledge, and then there are a set of skills, particularly those having to do with local engagement, right? With partnership development, with co-creation skills, with the ability to enter into deep dialogue and a variety. Those are not skills that typically get taught in business school. But I think increasingly, as we look ahead, they need to be. Right? So if I think about the 21st century MBA, this increasingly becomes a skill set that's really important for not only people that want to, you know, enter existing companies and be part of an ongoing business, but most importantly, those that are going to be part of the, you know, kind of creation of tomorrow's business.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Stu and Fernando. It was great hearing from you too. I'm sorry that we had trouble with your audio, but it is really an interesting book. It's a wide variety of contributors, a lot of different perspectives, and I think it's a really important bit of literature for everyone who's interested in this space. And so I thank you both for joining us from Burlington and from late evening in Korea. Fernando, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And Stu, thanks so much. You can come back to nextbillion.net to see a replay of this, as well as to find links to the book and some other materials. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.